All right, well, I actually use my Apple Watch to time me. Oh, we have a timer also, so that's great. So let's get started. I wanted to talk a little bit about, the value paradox around identity management and identity governance. I think, in reflecting what we've been doing over, almost 30 years now, it's really interesting to see some of the things that I continue to see, which I'll talk a little bit more about here as we carry on. But what I want to talk a little bit about today is what is the state of identity? From a market perspective, what is the value paradox? What are the inflection points that I've seen in my time around identity governance or identity management? And also what I think is next coming with respect to, let's call it the future of identity. So the state of IGA, or the state of identity, and what customers are saying, to me, and I'll be really honest with you, is a little disappointing. There was a Gartner study just a little while ago, and it was an excellent study, and it showed a lot of the reasons why people were changing, making decisions to change their identity infrastructure. And, there was, 10% said this, 4% said this, 19% said that. But the most interesting thing to me was when you just took out the numbers of the folks that said they were happy with their, with their implementation as it was today, it was only 24%. So in some ways, that's really surprising to me. I mean, we've been at this for a long time, yet 76% of customers are unhappy with their existing solution. Another thing, and also somewhat disappointing to me in talking to Gartner, was their decision to retire the Magic Quadrant. And like any vendor, we participated in the Magic Quadrant for many years. And I remember speaking with the guys at Gartner, and I said, well, what's the decision around this? Why did you want to retire it? And they said, there's a lack of innovation. And again, that was another disappointing thing to me. Again, when you've put your life into this, you hope that 3/4 of the customers aren't tossing out their software every few years, but that seems to be the way we are. So one of the, just to give you one small tidbit about that, I spoke to a number of customers over the last couple of days. Now, how many of you know how long Active Directory has been released for? Does anybody remember? It was February 2000. So what was that, 22 years ago? And I talked to a customer yesterday that had a problem with a vendor integrating with Active Directory. And I talked today with a customer who was so fed up with their vendor's integration with Azure that it almost wanted to make me cry. I mean, if we're still at the point where we can't handle these off-the-shelf products as we should be able to handle them, it is disappointing. But a number of things that I've seen that really bother me, that I think give pause to the value, is just the cost and infrastructure around a lot of the identity solutions that are out there, whether they're SaaS or whether they're on-prem. Buying the virtual machines, deploying the virtual machines, monitoring the virtual machines, whether it's that or whether it's monitoring your vendor's installation and making sure that their systems are all up and operational. And I'm not saying that I'm any better from that perspective. When I used to work at One Identity, we had to be worried about whether or not, Azure instances were up, or another company I was at, we had to worry about AWS instances being up. All of these things, I think, just add up around the cost and infrastructure for customers. And again, disappointing. And speaking of disappointing, literally for the last 10 years, but especially over the last few years, I hear this resounding, kind of tide of the user experience just sucks. People have to go to a different UI, get a completely different experience just to request an entitlement of some nature. And all of our customers are trained on this other system to request a laptop or to book an airline ticket or what have you, but the identity system is separate. And, there's just, If you step back and you think about what I just said, 76% of customers are unhappy. Imagine you go out and you train all of your employees on the new system that you just put in. You bring in a set of vendors, or you bring in a vendor, your favorite partner, to get your system installed from that vendor, right? And we all know that the vendor for company X is not going to be a vendor for company Y. So if you throw X out and replace it with Y, guess what you're doing? You're bringing in a whole new set of vendors, and you're training all of your employees again in a different user experience. Again, it's just another area where I don't think we as an industry have provided the value that we should be. And then lastly, and I think this is really important and something I'll talk a little bit more about, we've just built another silo, right? If you step up out of the basement, and I hate to say it, I'll say it about myself, you guys can be on the bridge of the ship if you want, but sometimes I feel I'm down in the boiler room shoveling the coal. We've really created another silo within the organization. So we've got our identity silo, we've got our accounts receivable silo, we've got our internal audit silo, we've got our accounting silo, what have you. It's just yet another silo. And again, something that has to be maintained and is separate from, in a lot of cases, what the business is doing. So in order to sort of, I want to set the stage a little bit around a few of these inflection points that we've had so I can give you my thoughts about where I believe things are going. So when I first got into this business, the whole point of the product that we were selling and what a lot of the vendors were selling at the time was to synchronize email addresses between multiple different systems. And then ultimately to do provisioning. So when someone started on day one, they would have their Active Directory account, or, as I mentioned here, back in the day, CC Mail, Lotus Notes, DBase, all of those different things needed to have an account. And they were all handled by the local administrators in typically in-house network admins and later the IT departments. And the challenge was the days or weeks to grant access. In fact, just an interesting factoid, when we joined Microsoft and came in with the Zoomit product, the MetaDirectory product, and what someone mentioned yesterday, Microsoft MetaDirectory services, what we found was that Microsoft IT would, on average, take between 7 and 9 working days to get someone completely provisioned. Didn't really matter for an employee. If I was sitting there and I didn't have access, it wasn't a big deal, but Microsoft, and probably you guys, and like I am today, we pay contractors a lot of money, and to have them sitting around for 7 to 9 days was something that was justifying a purchase of a product like ours. So one of the things from my perspective is this first inflection point was all about supporting IT and making the IT group more efficient. The second inflection point was a little bit different. It was a few years later, not that much further, but we started, as I think a lot of you probably saw, a lot of regulatory rules came in, both in the United States, especially to begin with, but eventually in the EU. So there were a ton of governance products that came into play. It was also in around 2005 when we first started seeing the true SaaS products coming to market, whether it was SailPoint or, if you remember, Avexa back in the day, those products came to life, and they were being sold primarily to help with governance, to help with a lot of these compliance issues. These things that potentially people would get large fines for. There was always the threat that somebody could go to jail. It was also the time that we started to see the migration or the rise of the SaaS products, right? Going from on-prem products to SaaS-based identity products. And they started to proliferate. Lots of different vendors out there selling both on-prem, selling SaaS products, and even today, I'm sure you guys know, you can go to your favorite vendor and typically buy the on-prem version of their product or their SaaS version of the product. And in most cases, those products actually don't have the same feature set. So again, a lot of complexity and a lot of cost for the customer, which I don't think has been returned to the customer. One of the things we saw also at this point in time was a lot of the products being kind of thrown out as part of this process because the on-prem products didn't really take care of the SaaS cloud products very well. So yet again, another inflection point and another reason why customers wanted to migrate or purchase new solutions. And then I think this is a little bit more about where I think we're starting to move towards, where we start to see efficiency and security converge to drive business alignment. And what do I mean by that? Again, if you cast yourself back, and I hate saying things like this because then I'm the one that's the really old person, but I remember when I used CC Mail for my mail package, and I used Lotus 123 for my spreadsheet, and I used a product called WordPerfect, right, for my my typing. Yeah, thank you. And every single time that you went from one of these solutions to the other when you were at your desktop, when you were sitting at your old IBM PC in 1990, you had a different UX, you had a different button to push for help. Control V was not Control V in another product, right? So this caused a huge problem with productivity because your brain was context switching all the time. What do I do when I'm in CC Mail? What do I do when I'm Lotus 123? And then we saw Microsoft come out with something called Microsoft Office, where all of these things were under one umbrella, and the interface and the user experience and the buttons and the Control V and the Control X were the same across the platform. I think that was a key thing, and I believe something is very similar is starting to happen in the identity area. So we're starting to see best-of-breed SaaS applications being replaced by best-of-suite SaaS applications. A number of people have talked about this today just around identity, but I think we're also going to start to see it around business platforms, in particular like ServiceNow, which is the one that's most interesting to me, but others also. A better UX, for all those reasons I talked about before, easier to get your customers trained, easier to bring a vendor in using a business platform, reduced friction, greater visibility, and quicker time to value become possible when you're based on a business platform. The challenge I find, and this goes a little bit to what Gartner said about the fact that there hasn't been any innovation, is things like AI, machine learning, deep learning aren't really there yet around identity. There's some great stuff being done by, for example, if you were listening to Alex's talk on Microsoft about a lot of the signals that they get across the platform, which is amazing. But in the general, deep into identity, we still have a long way to go around machine learning and artificial intelligence. And like everything else, that needs to be part of the platform that the business is using to get the most value. And that's kind of my point here is these cloud native, platform native solutions are what we need, and they have to align with the business investments. You see, I stroked out the word tech for an important reason here. A lot of decisions around identity have been made from a technical perspective, not a business perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm starting to see more and more customers and more folks in the market start looking at what their business is doing from a strategic perspective to drive the digital transformation in their organization and how that ultimately is going to affect identity. And I do believe in this last point here on the bottom that it's the rise of these platforms where identity sits at the center of the business platform. And I mentioned, or I've listed a few of the ones here. So I do really believe in this statement that identity must become part of the business, not apart from it. And I put a few quotes up here just to sort of try to illustrate a little bit of this. There's been some acquisitions recently, this acquisition of Singular Key, which was all about no-code identity and security orchestration. Awesome acquisition, yet it's no-code and low-code identity orchestration in a different product. What if your company is using yet another product that does low-code, no-code, or orchestration? How do you merge these things together? Well, the answer is you don't. So again, you have a loss of value. Todd McKinnon at Okta, when they acquired Auth0, great quote. He said, identity has to rise up to be one of those primary clouds, and if it doesn't, it will be just subsumed into other clouds and Okta won't reach its potential. He got it right. Identity has to be part of the cloud, not apart from it. And, you know, I love, obviously I grew up at Microsoft, but I love the fact that they've got a product called Power Automate, and they're starting to work it across all their different applications and merging it into a lot of the different parts of the platform. And ultimately, it's those kind of things when they get backported, in quotes, into identity that's going to provide the real value for us. And we did a little survey. I know we've got the results down at our booth if you drop by. But when we went out, we basically asked, I can't remember how many companies it was, but it was quite a number of companies, about some of their biggest problems with identity and getting value out of identity. And interestingly enough, 50% of the respondents said that user experience topped the list of challenges across most of the segments, whether they were an enterprise customer, a medium-sized customer, or a smaller customer. And again, I just think that's hugely important, user experience. And all we're doing is building more identity products that have different user experiences. And you know, back to my point about how in the old days we might use CC Mail and WordPerfect and Lotus 1-2-3, 45% of the people that we surveyed expected that they would get a high productivity boost if they used fewer applications or systems as it applies to identity. And I truly believe in that. Again, when I talk to customers, I hear the same thing from a lot of customers over and over again. My users don't like the fact they have to go from one system to another system. You know, you probably have all experienced the very same thing that I experience on a daily basis, which is remembering what you have to do in one system versus another system. So, you know, sort of as my conclusion to the talk here, I really do believe that what we're going to see in the future is more customers making purchase decisions based on the business strategy of the company as opposed to the technical strategy. What is it that they're using to drive their digital transformation, whether it happens to be ServiceNow, whether it happens to be Azure, and then wanting to build their identity foundation on that business platform as a part of the business, not apart from it. So with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I hope that everybody sticks around for the awards and obviously the reception and more beer.